In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear wheel bearing on this Chevy El Camino. Now this is an oversized bearing, comes with the seal and of course the bearing inside of there. Let's get started. On the passenger side of the rear differential, right between these two reinforcement pieces, you'll see the fill plug. Use a 3/8 extension with a ratchet. Slide it right in there. If needed, clean the dirt from around it and from inside of it so this ratchet or extension can seat. Break it free. Depending on how full this is, it may leak a little bit, so have a collection bucket ready. That comes out. Let's set it aside. Use a 1/2-inch socket and remove all the bolts holding the rear differential cover onto the rear differential. Make sure you have a collection bucket underneath to catch all the oil that's going to drain out of this. I'm going to start at the bottom so that as I work my way up, if the seal breaks free, it can just drain without getting on my tool or my hands. This last one I'm just going to crack free, but not remove all the way. At this point, we can slowly pry the bottom of the cover out. Seal hasn't broken free yet, but this will allow us to basically pivot the cover out, control the flow of oil. Use a pry bar and a hammer. There it goes. Finish removing the bolt and then the cover. Remove your hubcap if your vehicle had one, and then use a 19mm socket and remove all 5 lug nuts, and then pull the wheel off. And pull the wheel off. I'm going to spray a little bit of rust penetrant right around the center where the drum meets the hub and around the lug studs. It is quite stuck on here. I know it's not the shoes because everything spins freely. It's just seized onto the axle. Use a hammer. I'm going to start out with a dead blow rubber mallet just to be more gentle and try to create some vibrations and break this free. I'm going to tap from the back side. You can also tap from the center here. You could use an air hammer and cause some vibration. Basically, vibration will break this free and allow you to slide it off. Now wiggle the brake drum and slide it off. On the rear differential, we have to spin the drive shaft, so make sure the vehicle is in neutral until we can see this 5/16 bolt that locks in the center pin, which locks in the axles, of course. So let's remove this. Break that free. Make sure I don't get my tool stuck in here. Take this out, set it aside, and push this center pin out through the top. Set this aside as well carefully. Now at this point you want to be careful not to spin the differential too much because these spider gears here will move and can fall out. We do want to push the axle shaft in at this point from the outside. Sometimes that clip falls out by itself. Other times you have to fish it out with a magnet, but this unlocks the axle. Now pull the axle out. Have a rag to wipe it off as you pull it out. Set that aside. Install your bearing removal tool, which has this piece that swivels. Once you put it in there, make sure it's the correct size, of course. You're going to push this washer up against the outer part of the bearing and this jam nut that holds it all together. Now if you have a tool that's too large, it's not going to be able to straighten out in there in the axle tube, so remove it, go one size down, And if you pick the size that is too narrow, it's actually just going to pull right through when we use the slide hammer on the end of it. That's why it's important to have the correct size. I'm going to snug this up right up against the inside of that bearing. It doesn't have to be very tight, but I will snug it with some adjustable pliers. Install the slide hammer into the end of the tool. And with this bottomed out, slide the bearing right out. And there it is. Have a collection bucket to catch the fluid. Let's wipe down the area. Make sure that everything is in order. Now, of course, installing an oversized bearing means that the differential tube is already somewhat damaged and it needs this oversized bearing. Now, I know I took one out. That's because this differential already had one installed, but if you had a factory bearing, most likely it will have had play. Regardless, after this is cleaned up, you want to remove any burrs in here that may be present, and then take the new bearing with this ring, the O-ring, facing in and the flat seal facing out. You do not want this seal that has a spring on it facing outward. So, drive this in, give it a quick tap with your hand to lock it in, and now let's get a seal and bearing installer that's going to fit right on the outer edge, the outer race of this bearing to drive it in. Do not hammer on this seal or you will damage it. Here's my appropriately sized wheel seal and bearing installer. Hammer it in. You can hear when it bottoms out because the sound goes from a hollow sound that resonates through the whole tube to a solid sound because it has hit the end of the tube, well, the end of its cutout right here. I'm going to give it a couple extra taps to ensure that it really is fully bottomed out. All right, that's no longer going in. Everything is installed and seated. Let's continue. This bearing in here comes with some grease packed onto it, but what I'm going to do is add a little bit of oil. I'm just going to use the gear oil that we're going to be using to fill up the differential anyway, and just work this around. Don't put too much. The oil isn't really supposed to be in here. The oil's back there, but this will keep the bearing lubricated for a long time. Slide in the axle shaft. Careful of your new seal. Try not to drag it along the seal, and once you get it most of the way in, make sure that you don't push one of those spider gears out. So if you feel it lock in, or if you feel it try to push on it, just back it out. Give it really small, short twists. That's going to line up the splines. Apply pressure. All right, that's in all the way. You may have to go in the rear differential, just hold that spider gear that goes on this axle, maybe wiggle it around. As you wiggle this, just get the splines to mesh together. Once this is pushed all the way in, you want to make sure it's bottomed out so we can lock it in with that C-clip. Take your C-clip, inspect it. This one's in reusable condition. These are just wear marks. That's totally normal. Slide it onto the cutout of the axle. Hold it here, and from the outside, pull the axle or just push it through here. Once again, make sure you don't spin this too much. Take your center pin and line it up, making sure that the hole for the bolt is at the top. These gears may have moved, so you might have to push them around a little bit to get this to line up. And make sure that the bolt hole is facing sideways. Drop it down. Have a hand down there to make sure it doesn't go all the way through. Not that anything would happen, but you'd have to then push it back up. The bolt that locks it all in, I cleaned up the threads on it. It should have some thread locker on. I put some red thread locker on those threads. We're going to slide it through, make sure it lines up with that pin, push it up or down as needed, and thread this on by hand. We're going to bottom it out and snug it up. Going to switch to my 5/16 ratchet. That was an 8mm wrench, and the 8mm fits, but it's not as snug of a fit. I want to make sure I don't strip this out. So at this point, I'm just going to give it about 1/8 of a turn, make sure that's nice and tight. The thread locker will lock that in. I'm going to wipe the differential down so we can get this ready for the cover. This you could either use a gasket on or just some RTV, but I'm going to start by removing all of the oil and everything that dripped off of here so I can then clean it. You want to use a razor blade to clean this or a scraper. This is pretty hard steel here, so you're not going to damage it easily, but avoid using a sanding disc because that will eat through the material too much. Once you clean this off, we'll do the same to the cover and make sure that all of this old RTV is off of it and that it's nice and clean. Once you're done cleaning everything, it doesn't have to look perfect. Use some brake parts cleaner and a clean rag and wipe off or degrease this surface. Just spray a light layer and wipe this all down. We're going to do the same to the cover side so we can then put RTV on or a gasket if you use a pre-cut gasket, and then put this all on. Clean off the bolts that go in here. Use a wire brush or run them through the wire wheel and degrease these as well so they can catch onto their threads properly. It's also important to clean the threads that go in here. Use compressed air, some brake parts cleaner, and just scrape off all the RTV that is there. You don't want to put a bolt in a hole that's stuffed with RTV and try to compress it. That actually could strip out the threads because it's not going to compress, it's just going to push the bolt out. I have the pan cleaned up and degreased, put a thin layer of RTV all the way around, center it up between the holes, but go on the inside of the hole where, well, you want to go around it. Make sure when you put the pan on, you don't move it around too much so the RTV doesn't smear. And of course, make sure you line it up right with the deeper groove around the ring gear. Have your bolts ready, or at least one of them, to thread it on and lock this in place. You don't have to tighten it just yet. You need to at least put 2 bolts in to get all the holes lined up. All right, once you get 2 in, just bottom them out by hand. This will hold the cover in place so you can start in the rest of them. I'm going to bottom these out just so that I can seat the cover and make the RTV seal up completely. I'm going to go in a cross pattern in order to make sure that it spreads evenly as I tighten the cover. After that, I'll give it about 5 to 10 minutes for the RTV to set, and then we'll go back around and tighten them all up. Going to go in a cross pattern and just give them about 1/8 of a turn after they bottom out at most. That should be plenty to squish this down. Double check them all. Make sure that as you go around, feel it out to make sure that they're all evenly tightened. I'm going to clean off the surface of the axle on the hub side of it where the drum goes on. I don't want any of this rust interfering with the drum seating properly and evenly. So I'm going to take a wire wheel on a drill and just wire wheel this clean. It doesn't have to look perfect, but it does have to be clean. I'm going to put some anti-seize on the surface of the axle, right where the drum goes on. Now I don't want a lot, just a thin layer, because if you put too much, it'll squish out once you put the drum on, and it'll start flinging onto the surface that the drums stop the vehicle on, and you definitely don't want that. You just want enough to prevent rust and corrosion from building up over time. That way, not only the drum doesn't seize on, but it could actually swell if it gets too rusted, and it'll start pushing the drum out, and that's obviously going to cause some braking issues. Avoid getting it on the threads of the lug studs. Those should stay nice and dry. If you get some on, no big deal, but just wipe it off at the end. I'm also going to cover right in the center here where the wheel sits, and the drum, of course. That's going to prevent both of them from getting stuck on in the future. Once again, a thin layer will go a long way. Once you have the anti-seize applied, clean up the backside of the drum where it mounts onto here and make sure it is rust-free. And then, of course, slide it right over. Make sure everything fits. Now back onto the front side of the differential. Let's fill it with the appropriate type of gear oil. We're going to fill it up with a few quarts until it starts trickling out of the fill plug, and that's how you know that it's full enough. Of course, make sure you're on flat level ground when you do this. Otherwise, if the differential's tilted from the car being off center, well, it's not going to fill correctly. Here we go. All right, this is full, so I'm going to cap it off. Bottom it out and just give it a little extra, and that's plenty tight. Of course, you want to wipe off anything that was dripping there to ensure that it doesn't continue dripping on the ground after you're done. Let's get the wheel back on. Center it up. Reinstall all 5 lug nuts. We'll bottom them out in a cross pattern, and then we'll torque them down also in a cross pattern once the vehicle is on the ground. "100 foot-pounds in a cross pattern." Here we go. Double check them all. If your vehicle had some hubcaps, go ahead and reinstall them. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.